Hey everybody, welcome to the videos for my final picks for week 11 of the NFL season over on DraftKings, and we're finalizing a polished version of the first look we did earlier in the week. And if you do find this video helpful in any way possible, make sure you leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. If you want to take that one step further, kind of fishing over on Patreon. Link is down below in the description for that. Optimizer, spreadsheets, cheat sheets, projections, ownership projections. All the fun stuff can be found down below for the NFL and the NBA. And last but not least, this video is sponsored by Prize Picks. I'm sure most of you know this by now, but if you don't, it's daily fantasy sports simplified, just you. Versus the projections, there's no sharks, 150 max contests or salary cap restrictions or anything like that. Just you versus the props they offer each and every single day. And as of right now, if you're new signing over on Prize Picks, you can get a free money bonus as an instant deposit match up to $100. When you use code CPEN and tell them I sent you. I think it'll be it for the plugs for the most part. So without further ado, let's dive into today's video. And as always, we'll start with the quarterback position. I'm going to be honest, this weekend, I have a very tight player pool when it comes to the quarterback spot. Only 4 guys listed here. You could add a couple of guys, maybe like a Derek Carr or Jalen Hurts if you want to expand your player pool a bit. But to be honest, I find myself kind of just narrowing it down to these 4 quarterbacks this weekend. We'll start up top with the most expensive guy in the slate, typically is at the quarterback position, but Josh Allen, $8,100. It's a good matchup versus Indy. The Bills have a pretty high implied team total, which is no different than usual. 28.25 here, 49.5 point over under in this game, 7-point favorites at home, and really nothing not to like about Josh Allen besides the steep price point, because he's averaging nearly 300 passing yards per game or 2 passing touchdowns. They throw the ball a lot. It's very hard for the Bills to trust Evan Singletary and Zach Moss with the run game, so really they just use Josh Allen as a running back, and they throw the ball a ton. So, I mean, he's pretty much the entire offense, and he has no shortage of weapons to get the ball to, and Stephon Diggs, Emmanuel Sanders, Cole Beasley, Dawson Knox returned, and it's just really hard not to like out in the spot versus the Colts, because the Colts have been terrible versus the pass this year. 23rd DVOA, and they're 28th versus quarterbacks, meaning they're allowing the 5th most points per game. He's got that nice high built-in floor with his rushing upside, nearly 40 rushing yards per game, which is kind of like a built-in passing touchdown right there at the 4 points. And he always has rushing touchdown upside as well whenever they get around the goal line, so loving Josh Allen in tournaments. Don't think I'm going to go there in cash games, but the Stephon Diggs, Josh Allen stacks are looking mighty fine if you have the money for them this weekend. And then those secondary stacks of these secondary options and Beasley, Knox, and Sanders are obviously in play as well. You can always run that back with a guy like Michael Pittman if you want to go with a full-on game stack there. And then what's going to be very popular this weekend is these KC Dallas stacks of Patrick Mahomes at $7,600 and Dak Prescott at $7,200. There's just no reason not to like this game. 56 point over under, 2.5 point spread, 29.25 implied team total for the Chiefs, 26.75 implied team total for the Dallas Cowboys. And there's just so many good offensive pieces on both sides of this game. For the Chiefs, you got Mahomes, who looked fantastic last weekend. He looks back after kind of having a rough skid there. Travis Kelce had a good game. Tyreek Hill has been fantastic all season long. Darrell Williams, yeah, he was fantastic versus the Raiders. Not sure how long that'll keep up, but he looked great. You also have some secondary options in McCole Hardman. And then as far as the Cowboys go, you got Dak Prescott, you got Zeke Elliott, you have Tony Pollard, even if you want to throw him in the GPP mix. Then you have Amari Cooper, CeeDee Lamb, Michael Gallup, Dalton Schultz. There are so many good weapons here. Plus this game starts at 4:25, so everyone's going to want to play the late game hammers. And I'm just saying right now, if you were doing very well after the 1 p.m. games are over, be careful if you don't have much exposure to this game, because there's going to be a lot of ownership on some of these players in this game. So I want a lot of exposure to this one. I like both Patrick Mahomes and Dak Prescott just about equally here. Patrick Mahomes is projected as the highest just raw points-wise quarterback on the entire slate. Dak Prescott is like second or third, but he grades out better point per dollar-wise than Patrick Mahomes. I feel like their ownership will be somewhat similar, although as of right now, I'm projecting Patrick Mahomes to be higher owned, but I could see that kind of going either way. I think in cash games, you'll probably see Dak Prescott higher owned than Patrick Mahomes, but that as of right now is just a hunch. I'm still projecting Mahomes higher, but I could kind of see that flip-flopping depending on which way people want to go with wide receivers. But love them both. Really no reason not to like either. I mean, the only reason you'd want to fade these guys really is just hoping this game busts, which is probably not going to happen, but I would not be surprised just because of the way the NFL has been this year. But both are averaging nearly 300 passing yards per game, 2.5 passing touchdowns, 8.2 yards per attempt for Prescott, 7.1 for Patrick Mahomes, and just no reason not to like both. I mean, the matchup for Dak Prescott's a lot better. The Chiefs are terrible defensively this year, on the second most points in the quarterback position, and their 27th DVOA versus the pass. Cowboys have been a bit tougher, but they're still 20th versus quarterbacks, despite being third DVOA versus the pass and allowing close to 300 passing yards per game. Plus, I don't really care about matchups much when it comes to the Chiefs' offense, so I would plan on loading up on both of these guys in cash games or tournaments this weekend. And then if you want to go dumpster diving and you don't want to spend top dollar for a quarterback and you want to fit in some more expensive studs at wide receiver or running back, I totally get it because there's a lot of good options this weekend. So Cam Newton sitting here at $5,100. He is going to be the starting quarterback for the Carolina Panthers this weekend, and he gets a great matchup versus Washington. I said the Chiefs are a great matchup for first quarterbacks, but Washington is just a little bit better as they're allowing the most points per game to the quarterback position, nearly 300 passing yards and 2.5 passing touchdowns allowed per game. Now, Cam Newton, he's not a guy I really trust that much. If he was like $6,000, there's no chance I'm playing Cam Newton, but at $5,100, a quarterback that has rushing touchdown and rushing yards upside, I will take it. He doesn't have to do much here. 23-point implied team total for the Panthers, but he has good skill position players to get the ball to in DJ Moore, Robbie Anderson, CMC. For now, I have Cam Newton projected for around 18 to 20 points. I think he's sitting somewhere like 19.3 or something like that. That currently is the best point per dollar quarterback on the entire slate. Not saying he's a lock to hit that, but the rushing floor is what kind of draws you into Cam Newton at $5,100. As ugly as it sounds, I actually think he's somewhat of a pretty solid option this weekend, specifically just because of the matchup versus the football team. Just bleeding points to quarterbacks this year. And then moving on to the running backs, there's a lot of ways you can go this weekend, whether you want to spend up, go right in the middle, or save some cash. But we'll start up top with CMC, $800. Still feels a bit too cheap here. Great matchup versus Washington. Their defense just has not been there this year. They just lost Chase Young, which is another big hit to that defense. And CMC last weekend was fantastic. Only had 13 carries, but close to 100 rushing yards. But the kicker was 10 targets, 10 catches, 66 yards, nearly 30 DraftKings points without scoring a touchdown. Like, that's basically his floor is around like 20 to 25 points. The ceiling, if he gets touchdowns, is like well in the 30s and close to the 40s, depending on if he gets bonuses or not. So CMC definitely going to be in play here. Really no reason not to like him. The only reason you wouldn't like him is if you're spending up for wide receivers or quarterbacks and you just don't have the money to fit in CMC, which I totally understand because, I mean, you can't play everybody on this slate. But on the season, around a 20% target share. Now, versus the run, they've been a little bit better. 12th versus running backs and 6 DVOA, but CMC is not a guy I care about matchups. And just overall, the defense has not been good this year. So definitely still liking CMC no matter what this weekend, just a matter of being able to afford him. Then you have Dalvin Cook, $8,200. Good matchup versus Green Bay. They're a team that does struggle versus the run. They have for a couple seasons now. I know they're not allowing a ton of points fantasy-wise to running backs, but they're 24th DVA versus the run, only allowing 74 rushing yards per game. And Dalvin Cook is one of the most talented running backs in the NFL. He's going to get you around 20 carries every game. He's using the passing game. We should get around 20 and 25 total touches from Dalvin Cook, around 100-some yards. Probably get into the end zone, get you a couple catches. That's a fantastic day, $8,200. Just a matter of scoring touchdowns if they're going to hit their ceilings or not at these price points. But I'm definitely liking Dalvin Cook a lot in tournaments. Probably would not go there in cash games, but I definitely think he's a solid tournament play. Nick Chubb, $700. We just got news that he got put off the COVID list and he's trending towards playing on Sunday, which means Nick Chubb is going to be a fantastic play versus Detroit. And no one's going to play Nick Chubb because if people are spending up for running backs, they're probably either playing Christian McCaffrey or Dalvin Cook. They'll probably take a stab at Zeke Elliott on the Cowboys just because they're facing KC's defense. They want some exposure to Dallas. They're going to play DeAndre Swift after that 33-carry game versus Pittsburgh. I totally get it. And since Nick Chubb did not play last week, they're going to see the injury designation next to his name until they take it off on DraftKings. That's just going to lower the ownership. And Nick Chubb does not catch passes, so it does hurt his floor a little bit, especially like on a PPR set like DraftKings. But Nick Chubb has like a ceiling as high as CMC in this matchup versus Detroit. Now, the floor is not there like CMC, but the ceiling, I mean, we could easily see Nick Chubb get 150-plus rushing yards, close to 200, and multiple rushing touchdowns in this spot versus Detroit. There's still no Kareem Hunt. Yes, Dearness Johnson will be involved somewhat, but Nick Chubb, I mean, the guy is one of, if not the best pure runner in football. I mean, I would say Derrick Henry and Jonathan Taylor right up there with them, but this is a perfect game script for Cleveland. They're playing at home. They're 11-point favorites, 27.5 implied team total. If you've watched the Browns passing game recently, I don't think a lot of those points are going to come from the passing game. Probably a lot from Nick Chubb here. He's averaging over 100 rushing yards per game, close to 20 rushing attempts per game, close to rushing touchdowns, 6 yards per carry. He's one of the most efficient runners in all of football. It seems like good things happen every single time he gets the ball. The offensive line is fantastic. They should have no problem versus Detroit, who is currently 29th DVA versus the run, letting over 3 DraftKings points per game, which is the third most. 110 rushing yards and well over a rushing touchdown. So love Nick Chubb in tournaments this weekend. And if he's going to be really low owned, I would like to be way overweight on Chubb. Zeke Elliott, $7,700. He is your pivot if you're not playing the Dallas passing game because you want some exposure to Dallas. And if you don't have Dak Prescott, CeeDee Lamb, or Amari Cooper in your lineup, try to get some exposure to Dallas. And Zeke Elliott should be somewhat low owned because everyone's going to play the passing game. Because if everyone's stacking KC, they're going to want to get a guy like CeeDee Lamb or Amari Cooper as a run back option. people aren't going to want to run him back with Zeke, or people are playing the Cowboys offense. They're going to get the passing attack, and they're not going to play Zeke. So he's actually a pretty good tournament play. I think he'll be high around the Nick Chubb just because people like Dallas a little bit more than Cleveland, I'm sure. But KC is not a defense you should fear by any means. 26 DVA versus the run. So I definitely think Zeke is in play. He's also involved in the passing game, which does boost his floor a little bit. The only annoying thing is that Tony Pollard exists, and he's very good, so he's going to get touches. But I think Zeke will be just fine here, especially if he scores touchdowns. DeAndre Swift, more of a tournament option here because being 11-point dog doesn't really set up well for the opposing running back. But DeAndre Swift is a guy that will be heavily used in the passing game. But I could not ignore the carries he got last week. I realized it was cold and a little bit snowy in Pittsburgh, and Jamal Williams was out, but 33 carries for DeAndre Swift. This is a guy that averaged around 13 to 14 carries a game heading into that week. Still averaging around 13 on the season, but 33 carries last weekend. But the reason we all like DeAndre Swift is because he has that 20% target share, close to 7 targets per game, which does boost his floor quite a bit. Cleveland has been a little bit stingy versus the run this year, but since he's using the passing game, I think he'll be just fine. Now, the chalk running back of the week, we have A.J. Dillon at $6,200. No reason if you're playing cash games to fade A.J. Dillon. The guy's a very good running back. He's solid. He's built. The guy's got thighs the size of watermelons. And Minnesota does not have a good run defense whatsoever. I would expect 20-plus touches here from A.J. Dillon. He saw 20-plus last week versus the Seattle Seahawks. Also had a couple of targets. But the Vikings are 28th DVA versus the run this year and allowing over 100 rushing yards per game. He's going to be the goal line back. He'll be using the passing game. Love A.J. Dillon. The guy's very talented, and he's on a good offense. 2-point favorites, 24.75 plot team total. $6,200 is way too cheap. A.J. Dillon needs to be around probably like $7,200, $7,300 because we knew that Aaron Jones was going to be out for this game, so he's just way too cheap. James Conner, you guys know I'm not a fan of James Conner, but he just keeps scoring touchdowns, and he gets a great matchup here versus Seattle. Still on Chase Edmonds. He's actually been using the passing game. He has like 9 targets the past couple of weeks. It's ugly. I don't like James Conner, but if he's going to give me around 15, 20 touches at this price point and a good matchup versus Seattle, I guess I have to be interested. He grades out very well in projections. He's averaging over a rushing touchdown per game this year, which is very annoying. I mean, a lot of times he does not get there yardage-wise, but he just kind of gets bailed out by touchdowns, but it keeps happening. Seattle's 11th DVA versus the run, but they're still allowing the second most points per game in the running back position. Also allowing over 7 catches and nearly 80 receiving yards, specifically at the running backs, and over 100 rushing yards. So James Conner finds himself in a very good spot this weekend at $6,100. He'd be a decent pivot off of Dillon, but honestly, I don't mind playing both in cash this weekend. And Michael Carter's a pivot off of both because he'll have lower ownership. But at $5,800, Joe Flacco will probably dump the ball off quite a bit to his running backs. And Michael Carter is a guy that's kind of excelled in that so far this season, averaging around 5 targets per game, over a 12% target share. Good matchup versus Miami. They're 17th versus running backs in terms of fantasy points allowed per game. So I think Michael Carter at that price point is definitely somewhat interesting. A couple of guys I left out the list that you could obviously play is Myles Gaskin in the same game versus the Jets, who are getting killed by running backs this year. I just don't really trust Myles Gaskin too much. You could also look at Eli Mitchell if he happens to be good to go, but if he happens to be out somehow, you have Jeff Wilson, who is really cheap. I think $5,200 in a good spot versus Jacksonville. And when it comes to the wide receivers, I try to keep this as simple as possible because it would take forever breaking down every single wide receiver. It really just comes down to what games are you stacking, what format you're playing, because in cash games, you don't have to stack with your quarterback. You can kind of just pick these guys off by one, just looking at point per dollar, or who you're running it back with, or whatever stacks you're using. So if you are using Patrick Mahomes this weekend, Tyreek Hill, McCole Hardman, they're certainly going to be in play for you. I don't really have to tell you that Tyreek Hill is good at football. You have the matchup, you'll see probably a lot of Trevon Diggs, but I don't care. You're going to find ways to get on the football. He is too fast to be guarded. I don't care about matchups for Tyreek Hill. It just so happens to be that the Dallas Cowboys are actually allowing a lot of yardage and points per game to wide receiver position. And Tyreek Hill has been fantastic, like 10-plus targets almost every single week so far this year, and he's just a touchdown scoring machine. If you're using Josh Allen, Stephon Diggs, Cole Beasley, certainly going to be in play for me. You guys will throw Manny Sanders in the mix as well. Devontae Adams is one of those guys where I don't think you have to use Aaron Rodgers with them just because pretty much all the points from Aaron Rodgers go to Devontae Adams. I don't really like playing Aaron Rodgers too much in DFS, but Devontae Adams is certainly fine, even though it seems like he keeps busting, but still one of the safest options each and every single week. I should probably pull up their numbers just to make it more visual on the screen for you guys, just looking at their volume numbers. Like Adams leads all these wide receivers with a near 35% target share and an 83% weight opportunity share. Like I said, with the Cowboys, CeeDee Lamb, Amari Cooper, Michael Gallup, all these guys are fine. If pricing wasn't an issue, I'd prefer CeeDee Lamb over all of these guys, but since it is, Amari Cooper does grade out as the best point per dollar wise, even though he just seems to keep busting for me, but the targets are still there. It's kind of hard with all the options there are for Dallas, but I do like the price point quite a bit. Brandon Cooks is one of those guys you can use as one-off because I'm not going to play Tyrod Taylor in DFS this weekend. They're top 3 in points allowed per game versus the wide receiver position so far this year. DJ Moore, you don't have to stack with Cam Newton because rushing quarterbacks like Lamar Jackson, Jalen Hurts, and I guess now Cam Newton, you never really have to use an option with them just because they can get there by themselves. But if you do want to use DJ Moore this weekend, like it's a great matchup. The football team is getting killed versus wide receivers, allowing the second most points per game to the position. Jalen Waddle was fun just to pick on the Jets, who are currently dead last to the second DVA versus the pass. Despite being 14th versus wide receivers, T. Higgins is just fine because of the price point. Corey Davis, one of those guys you can use as a one-off just because I'm not using Joe Flacco, but I don't think he'll be afraid to take some shots with Corey Davis, and it's a good spot here versus the Dolphins, who are getting cooked versus wide receivers this year. Michael Gallup already talked about. And if you want a dirt cheap option, Marcus Johnson had around 100 yards last weekend on 6 targets, caught 5 of them. No Julio Jones, so he'll be involved, and it's a good matchup versus Houston. I just don't really think that the Titans are going to be in a position where they have to throw the ball a ton, but I don't hate it, $3,500 just because he opens up some salary. Not a cash game option for me, more than likely, but I do think he's a pretty solid tournament option if you need to go cheap this weekend. But lots of good wide receivers. Just really depends on your roster construction, what quarterbacks you're using, what stacks or whatever run backs you are looking for. Then moving on to the tight end position, it's kind of a tough spot this week because typically we have like some cheap tight end that we just all kind of agree on playing and they're super chalky on DraftKings. That's been Dan Arnold the past couple of weekends. Now at $4,100 playing San Francisco, it just doesn't feel as good as it did the past couple of weeks, even though he's been super consistent. I'm just not seeing like a clear chalk tight end as of right now. So maybe that would lead you to play a guy like Travis Kelce more often than you would an expensive wide receiver on this slate, but I think you can make a case of going pretty much with any of these cheap options. For me, it's probably just going to come down to whoever fits at the end. Like, I'm not going to build around my tight end. Like, I'm not plugging Dawson Knox in first in my lineup, and then we'll build around Dawson Knox. I'll just, whoever fits at the end, come on down. You can just fill out the rest of my lineup. If it happens to be David Njoku, you know what? So be it. I don't hate that this weekend versus Detroit. Cole Kmet at $3,400. Baltimore is getting killed by tight ends so far this year. I could actually see him potentially being the somewhat chalky tight end on the slate. It's not pretty, but he has a 20% target share in the season and getting close to 5 targets per game. And both more people are looking at matchups, allowing 72 receiving yards, over half a receiving touchdown, and the third most DraftKings points per game to the position. So Cole Kmet should be trailing here. They're 5-point dogs at home. I don't hate it. Tyler Conklin, he gets like 5 to 7 targets every single week. Had 2 touchdowns last weekend facing Green Bay. Don't hate it. This should be somewhat of a high-scoring game. Dawson Knox versus the Colts. The Colts have been awful versus tight ends so far this year. They're actually allowing the 6th most points per game to the position. I don't hate Knox if you just want some cheap exposure to the Bills. Dan Arnold, we know, is going to be a super safe option. He's going to get the targets. It's just a little bit of a tougher spot here versus San Francisco, but not overly concerned about it. I think you can play Dan Arnold with confidence. Just a little bit pricier than he has been because I remember the one week he was $2,800, and he was in the low 3K range. Then he went to like $3,500. Now we're about $4K, but I think this is deserved. Like, he should probably be close to around $5,000 if we're being honest. So I still like Dan Arnold this weekend. Dalton Schultz, if you want exposure to Dallas, and Travis Kelce. I mean, he's Travis Kelce, and he just seems a bit too cheap at $7,100. I realize it doesn't feel like he's been like Travis Kelce this year in just terms of dominating, but he's still a tight end one this season, and he had a great game last week versus the Raiders, although he seems like he always has good games versus the Raiders, but you can play Kelce versus Dallas, and if they just happen to try to sell out to stop Tyreek Hill, I'm not saying that's going to work, but if they try, they'll just leave some softer coverage over the middle for Travis Kelce at that price point. And then as far as defenses go, I try to play the cheapest defense I possibly can without like them getting, like I think they're going to get throttled. Like I'm not going to play like the defense playing the Bills or the defense playing the Chiefs. Like I'm just not going to do that. But I do think the Washington football team at $2,400, I think Cam Newton, DJ Moore, CMC are all definitely playable on this slate. But it's still only a 43.0 over-under, and they're 3.5-point dogs, and it's only a 23.25 implied team total. Like Cam Newton, probably a good chance he could throw a pick or two in that game and still get their DFS-wise. So I don't hate the football team. The Panthers versus Washington, they're certainly in play. Their defense has been solid this year. Less than a 20-point implied team total against them at home. The Browns defense, I'm projecting to be the highest owned defense as of right now. $3,100. I realize there's some weeks where they get absolutely cooked and some weeks they are dominant. It's just like really hit or miss. I will say some of the Browns players have been kind of calling out the scheming on their defense, so I don't know if that's a narrative or anything. Myles Garrett himself called it out. And I mean, Myles Garrett could easily get like 4 sacks here versus Detroit. And I will say, it sounds like Jared Goff could potentially miss this game, so Tim Boyle will be the quarterback. If we're asking who Tim Boyle is, yeah, exactly. So I'm not really scared about the Detroit offense here. The only guy that is scary is DeAndre Swift and I guess TJ Hawkinson, but I don't think they're going to be able to move the ball too well here in 11-point favorites at home. The Browns defense does look pretty good with some sack upside, and they're relatively pretty healthy back there. They did get the rookie Jock back, JOK for his initials if you don't know who that is. And their secondary is pretty healthy too. So I think they're actually in a pretty good spot, even though they just got cooked by the Patriots last weekend, and they seem to give up every single third down conversion ever. And the Dolphins facing Joe Flacco and the Jets, I think that's self-explanatory. But with that being said, I think that'll be it for the video. So I hope it was helpful, and if it was, make sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet already. If you want to take that one step further, become an official member over on Patreon. Link is down below in the description for that. And don't forget, this video was sponsored by Prize Picks, just you versus the projections. And as of right now, if you're new sign over there, you can get a free money bonus up to $100 when you just go to Pennell and tell them I sent you. I'm going to be honest, I really do like Prize Picks. I play over there every single weekend. In addition to what I do on DraftKings, it just makes it even more exciting. And if you're using free money, why not just use it to your advantage? But I think that'll be pretty much it. I will stop rambling. I get out of here, and I'll see you guys tomorrow for the lineup building and core plays video.